provision for the ratification of treaties, 2/3 of the Senate, not just 60 to cut off a filibuster. 67 is so important, and why it's critical that anything like this be directed down the treaty path. That's our protection.
How confident are you that he won't sign this as an executive agreement? It's being very carefully worded as the Copenhagen Agreement, precisely so he can do that.
The environmentalist would like that, but I think it would be a political firestorm in this country if he did. Let's not forget the Clinton administration presented Kyoto as a treaty. The notion that he could shift and declare Kyoto 2 not a treaty would be devastating politically.
All right. Lord Monckton has requested the use of my blackboard, a national treasure. Someday it'll be in the Smithsonian. No, it won't. We'll be back in just a second. He'll take it over.
Thank you.
America, we're at a crossroads, and I think it's time to make a decision. I showed you last night. You're going to stand with the new revolutionaries of 2009, or are you going to stand with the original revolutionaries of 1776? You want Harry Reid, Nancy Pelosi mandating how big your car can be, how many miles you can drive? You want Charlie Rangel dictating the number of Big Macs you can eat? Or if you can eat meat at all, and as crazy as that sounds, in Baltimore, the city of Baltimore right now, it's Meatless Mondays in all the schools so the kids can learn how to make healthy choices not only for them, but also for the planet. I don't know about you, but I would rather make my own choices. Seems like an easy choice, but yet here we are. Back again with Lord Christopher Monckton, former advisor to the British Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, and climate change expert, and John Bolton, former U.S. ambassador and also Fox News contributor. Okay, Lord Monckton up at the blackboard. Boy, that's intimidating. Have I ever done that to you? That's not good. Yes, my lord.
Pay attention, Beck.
Yes.
5 points from Gryffindor for smiling in class.
All right, what do you have?
Right. Here is why there is no point, economically speaking, in doing anything to curb our carbon emissions, even if, as we now know, in fact, the UN is wrong. But let's pretend it's right.
Okay.
Here's why nothing will work. We burn 30 billion tons a year of CO2 worldwide. All right? 30 billion tons a year. Now, that is the equivalent of 2 parts per million per year in the atmosphere. So that's 15 billion tons per part per million, all right? Are you with us so far?
Not really, but I'll pretend, yes.
Good, right, that's very simple. Right. 30 divided by 2, 15 billion, okay.
Got it.
With us so far. Now, the UN says we're going to increase the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, unless we do anything about it, by 468 parts per million in the next century. 468 ppmv. So that means, if you multiply that by that, you get 7 trillion tons we're going to emit of CO2 if we don't do any mitigation over the next century. 7 trillion tons. Okay. Now, they say that those 7 trillion tons are going to cause 7 Fahrenheit of warming in the next century. That's wrong, but that's what they say. That means that in order to forestall 1 Fahrenheit degree of warming, you have to forego the emission of 1 trillion tons of CO2. Now, divide 1 trillion tons by the number of tons, the 30 billion tons per year that we started with, that we're burning at the moment worldwide, and how many years is it going to take before we have saved 1 Fahrenheit degree? Come along, Bolton.
Yeah, no, I won't be alive.
Neither of you can work this out. It's 33 years for 1 Fahrenheit degree. Now, 33 years means no automobiles anywhere on the planet, no electricity, no planes, no trains, no hospitals, no factories, no carbon emissions at all for 33 years, just for 1 Fahrenheit degree. That is why it is absolutely no point trying to mitigate carbon emissions. It makes not the slightest difference to the climate. End of lesson.
John, how many different ways, when you were in the UN, are they coming after our sovereignty and our money?
Well, in a variety of different ways. And let's talk about one that Lord Monckton mentioned earlier, which I think is a continuing source of concern, and that's the idea of a kind of international tax. This has been proposed in a lot of different circumstances, a tax on international airline tickets, a tax on international banking transactions. Here in Copenhagen, it's a tax on environmental-related things. But the point is to provide a source of revenue to supranational institutions independent of the decisions of member governments, because the left internationally has recognized that the funding mechanism for the UN doesn't work. When you assess contributions annually and you have to depend on those Americans in Congress to pass annual appropriations, they fear Congress cutting off their money. So they're constantly looking for sources through some kind of tax mechanism that will bring in revenue that they can use independently of Congress. That's why in the Law of the Sea Treaty there's a revenue source from seabed mining. That issue, which sounds mindlessly technical, is something that comes up over and over again, and something that members of Congress and the American people need to know about and be concerned about.
When we're talking about CO2, the idea is the more CO2, the warmer it gets.
That's the idea.
Right.
Not true, but that's the idea.
But we're in a cooling period.
Yes.
And I'm hearing now scientists say that the cooling that is happening only proves how warm it's getting.
That's right, and that makes no sense, does it?
No.
No, none whatever.
So bring over, these are from Newsweek. Did you see these?
Yes, I've seen the original article from 1975, from which these are the two graphs.
Show me, put these up on the screen.
Here you've got the fall in temperatures from around 1945, roughly, until around 1970. And by that stage, they were all beginning to say, oh, we're heading for global cooling, we're heading for another ice age. And John Holdren, who is now the science advisor, believe it or not, to the President of the United States, he said at this time, in 1975, this is what he said. He said there's going to be so much ice accumulating in Antarctica because of the extreme cold that's coming because of our activities on the planet,